Hey, everybody. Welcome to the We Fix Pain podcast. This is episode number 9 with the one, the only Dr. Travis Owens, the cheer doc. We'll go into what that means here in just a little bit of time. But Dr. Travis Owens, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I've really liked the episode so far. So when you messaged me about doing one, I was very honored to be considered.
Well, we're honored to have you as a distinguished guest and an expert guest at that. So let's give you a little bit of info about Dr. Owens. Dr. Owens works for Arasti in Shirts, just north of beautiful scenic San Antonio, Texas. He went to the University of Florida and was a cheerleader at the University of Florida. Go Gators, right? Knock out that Gator chomp right there. But he's an expert. He teaches, coaches, programs strength training and conditioning, does seminars on injury prevention and injury reduction for cheer athletes, acrobatic athletes, and basically anybody that goes up in the air. And that's why we want him on the podcast, because I have some clinical questions, as do our guests, as do our listeners, about how do we reduce systematically these cheer injuries that keep cropping up in our office more and more and more. So that's why we have you on the podcast. You teach it, you coach it, you live it, you breathe it, you do it. You're the man. That's why we have you on.
I'm excited. I'm excited to share a little bit about this sport. It's definitely growing in popularity, especially with the recent news of it moving into the Olympic space. We've gotten full Olympics status that we've been trying to get for years and years. So to finally reach that point, you're starting to see more countries have national teams, which is very, very exciting. So, it's very big here and some other countries around the world, but it's only just beginning. So even our colleagues overseas that are practicing that may have a tie back to the States, they can also be prepared to see a big influx of cheer over the next few years to decades.
Yeah, I did not know it made Olympic status, but I'm excited too, because if you train all that time and you're competitive, you're an athlete and you need to compete at the highest levels. What better showcase than the Olympics?
Absolutely.
So, Doc, we're going to do a segment, 5 fun random questions. And you're from Florida. So these fun 5 random questions for people who don't know you will get to know you and all about the great state of Florida. You ready?
All right.
These came to me about 5 minutes ago. So whatever's in this deep, dark recess of my mind is what's coming out.
Oh, man.
All right, Florida Flair. Have you ever tried alligator?
Yes.
Is it good?
Quite a few times. I've actually killed an alligator.
Is that right?
When I had family members that were alligator trappers. So whenever you had a gator in your swimming pool or in your pond in your backyard, you would get a visit from just kind of, a unique type of pest control. And so I got to be part of it once and kill a gator. And a very popular dish in Florida is a gator po' boy, where you have gator.
Oh, wow. In the po' boy sandwich?
Yep. It's very good.
All right. Something to try then next time I get to Florida. Okay. Question number 2, yep, Florida Flair number 2. University of Texas and Oklahoma have joined the SEC. Good move or bad move?
Florida hasn't been good since I've been there. So, if they're really good competitors, it's not going to be great for us. If they're awful, they can join the rest of us and let Alabama and Georgia keep doing what they're doing every year. So
all right.
I think it's yet to be seen. But more competition is always great. So I'm looking forward to how the season's going.
Yeah, more hype, more TV sets, more cheeks in the seats, more revenue, and hopefully, your Florida Gators come out on top. All right, your favorite sporting event to either work as an athlete or participate as an athlete or work as a coach, what would that be?
So I do love cheer, obviously.
Your handle is not the cheer doc, right? Like that wouldn't give it away.
Yeah, honestly, rugby is my favorite sport to watch. And when I was in grad school, our school was known for its rugby program. We have a national champion, multiple national champion rugby program at Life University. And I lived with a lot of the rugby guys. I just happened to get tied up with a rugby house. So I fell in love with the sport. When they brought rugby back to the Olympics a few years ago, that was like the coolest thing ever, bringing rugby back to the Olympics. So, yeah, I backpacked Australia for 3 weeks a few years ago, and everywhere I went, we made sure to find like some sort of rugby match to watch. So, yeah, rugby is my
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I think those athletes don't get enough credit that they deserve, how physical and, how resilient they have to be.
Oh, yeah,
all right,
for
Florida,
sure.
The great state, has a lot of beaches. Which one's your go-to?
Well, I'm from Panama City Beach. Was born and raised there. So there, yes, there is some bias there as far as familiarity. Our Panama City has, it's a little self-righteous, but our city's tagline is "World's Most Beautiful Beaches." Being from there, I can say that they're great, but they're definitely not the most beautiful. So I would say my favorite beach in Florida would be next door to us in Destin. So when you get to like the 30A, Destin, Fort Walton Beach area, those beaches are really hard to beat because they're not as beat up as Panama City's beaches are. There, and then also like some of the Clearwater, Tampa beaches are really hard to beat too. So I love ours, but I'd have to put them a little
next
bit
to Rusty
further
Powwow,
down the
you and I get together. We'll do it in Destin or Clearwater then. Yeah, for sure.
we'll have a mic.
All right, last fun fact, and let's get to the topic at hand: the cheer athlete. So fill in the sentence. You're in Florida when.
The headline of the newspaper starts with "Florida man arrested for insert odd headline."
Gotcha.
There.
So what you're saying is, a little bit of drama leads to an arrest, leads to a headline.
I would say if you've seen Tiger King, you understand.
Enough said. Well spoken. So, Doc, in my office, in my practice, the past couple weeks, maybe past couple months, and it's summer, and I don't think that this is competition season for cheer. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm seeing more injuries creep on up, and I see a common pattern and theme developing, and that common pattern and theme appears to be year-round training for the cheer athletes. So I want to put it to you. Are cheer injuries, are they on the rise? Is my practice emblematic of what's going on across the nation with cheer athletes?
So I think that, maybe not necessarily on the rise as far as occurrence of athlete injuries. I think more what we're seeing is also am seeing, an increase with a population that I already see a large number of. What my opinion is that the athletes and coaches are starting to take the injuries a little bit more seriously than previously, and not trying to kind of brush things under the rug. The sport historically has a bit of a fear culture of injuries because of the competitive nature of the sport and the team dynamic aspect where everyone is a very integral part. We don't really have depth like a depth chart for certain sports. So when you have an athlete that's hurt, you may only have, one or two substitutions for that athlete. And so there's a big fear culture around injuries and athletes feeling like they would be pulled from the mat, that their competition season would be over, and that they would, negatively impact their team. And so now that we've had shows like cheer and we've got this Olympic status that's been going on, the injuries that are prevalent in the sport have gotten a lot of light in the media. And so a lot of parents and coaches are taking the injuries a little bit more seriously and trying to eliminate that fear culture. So when kids are hurt, they now have a more confident belief in their support system that they're not just going to be yanked because they're hurt, but that if we can address it, then we're going to be able to get this thing fixed and it's not going to affect us for the rest of the year. So I think more athletes are just finally speaking up versus like there's just a an increase of.
Gotcha. So these injuries were already present in the competitive cheer community 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago. It's just now, rather than wipe it underneath the table, hey, it's a problem and we need something, an evaluation, treatment, or an opinion, what's going on.
Right. Yeah. It's, the worst injury I've ever seen in my life in sports was a cheer injury, and this was in my college undergrad years. This is 2008. I watched a girl get all of her teeth knocked out, like all of them, and spit her teeth out on the turf at camp. Neck injuries, back injuries, concussions, broken, dislocated shoulders. I mean, it's a very, I don't want to scare people away from cheer, but it's a very high impact, high speed, high demand athletic activity that a lot of people are more familiar with sideline cheer of, kind of this kind of stuff where you're rooting a team on. Not a lot of people are familiar with the competitive all-star style of cheer, which is essentially a Cirque du Soleil show.
It's a performance.
I mean, it is tumbling. It's very performance based. It's very high intensity, and it's very precise. You got 30 people on a floor that's 200 square feet, all crisscrossing, running, flying, and it's a very dynamic event. And so the injuries are always there. I think it's just we're finally at a point where, parents are sick of losing money in their investment because cheer is not cheap. And they're like, we're going to protect our investment by getting your injuries fixed. And so docs like us, who historically may not have seen, or docs in the field that may not have seen a lot of cheer athletes, will start to see an increase as the sport continues to grow.
And I think you bring up a good point. I think there's two categories of injuries in cheer athletes. I was an athletic trainer in the collegiate setting for a period of time, and as an undergraduate and a graduate student. And one of my responsibilities was to coordinate with cheer. They would have a student that was there full time, and a graduate student that would liaison, or a full time person that would liaison with cheer. But when it was my turn to kind of rotate over there was the traumatic. And like you said, the girls going up, the girls going down, I landed funky from a jump, and then the overtraining. And I think you can classify that as traumatic overtraining. What are we seeing from a trauma standpoint? And then what types of injuries to specific areas are we seeing from an overtraining standpoint? So let's take the trauma piece because people can understand it. You mentioned the teeth knocked out. But what's the trauma part?
Sure.
What's the overtraining part look like from an injury standpoint?
So trauma is typically going to be ACL and an inversion ankle sprains. That's typically your trauma. The competitive side of cheer is done on a spring floor, similar to a gymnastics tumbling floor, routine floor. It's an unstable surface, and the shoes that our kids wear are purposefully built to be as minimal as possible. So you've got a very thin, minimalistic shoe on a surface that is not very stable. Excuse me. And so when they're going through a lot of their tumbling passes, they tend to have a lot of ankle sprains. And the reason isn't necessarily because of those two things I mentioned directly. The problem is the athletes are trained that dorsiflexion of the foot in any regard is considered unaesthetic and is also considered a grounds for deduction. So the athletes constantly live in a plantar flexed position. When you do your jumps, plantar flexion. When you do your tumbling, plantar flexion. When you're flying, or any sort of choreography, sharp lines are very pleasing to the judges. And so you'll actually get deducted for any sort of dorsiflexion. So when we think about how an inversion ankle sprain happens, there's plantar flexion and inversion. We have that combination of plantar flexion and inversion. Well, the kids are living in plantar flexion 100% of the time. So what I teach these athletes is you're 50% of an ankle sprain all the time. All it's going to take is a little bit of an instability component. You're going to turn your ankle, and you don't have enough of the requisite dorsiflexion eversion control to fight it. So it's going to go. There's nothing you can do to stop it. So we tend to see ankles the most underreported And
Yeah,
probably
you got your
more common
flyers
is
and then your
concussion,
bases.
if I'm being totally honest. The kids take blows to the head all the time. Flyers and bases both. Take blows to the head all the time. You know, I call it glitching when you're in a tumbling pass and you kind of like forget what you're doing. And you kind of glitch and you land on the back of your, you know, your upper back and back of your neck. And the kids will bounce up and, you know, run back to the corner and do the pass. But, I mean, it's grounds for concussion very often. So I think the most underreported traumatic is concussion. And with that, I have a specialist here in town that I send concussions to because those protocols, as you know, those protocols change regularly. And I don't stay on top of it. So I don't act like I'm a specialist there. And I don't play with concussions. You know, I don't want that to ever be a risk. But on the traumatic side, yeah, definitely ankles. And then, you know, the most common population for ACL tears in all sports is females, typically a field athlete or some sort of directional change athlete on their cycle, right? So we take the field out, but we put an unstable surface. So we've got females, you know, of pubescent and, you know, in precocious and some, you know, pubescent age doing high intense activities involve a lot of direction.
You're
change.
not
So it's a breeding ground for
ACL
ACL tears. So we tend to see a lot of those too. As far as the overtraining side goes, to answer your question as you pose it, which I know what you're getting at, but we're going to have an interesting combo. Lower back is where you see the most. The kids are stuck in this, you know, as quote air quotes lower cross syndrome. They're, you know, hyper, you know, weak in their glutes, hyper flexible in the hamstrings because of the demands for splits and, you know, flyers, body positions and things. They're typically pretty weak through the core, so they have this.
She just got married, by the way.
As
She's
Dr.
off the
Askey
market.
would say, J-Lo tilt position. But it's a very unique. Yes,
Congrats, J-Lo.
I know she's listening to us, so congrats, J-Lo and Ben. I know they're part of our handful of listeners, so we appreciate that. But, you know, cheer is a very unique population because you've got kids that can do splits, but they still will fail a Thomas test. And so it's unique to see somebody who has so much capsule laxity, so much anterior core laxity, but yet still such stiff, rigid hip flexors. And so that overtraining mindset is a lot of times is just due to poor biomechanics because they're stuck in one way. Now, as far as overtraining my mindset, I do not believe cheerleaders can overtrain. I don't think any athlete can overtrain, and I firmly believe that. I believe that we don't, excuse me, I don't think that we overtrain. I think that we under-recover. And that's where we have a lot of the issues with some of these things. And the reason I feel that way is I train my cheer athletes on a strength and conditioning side with CrossFit-style programming. And if we look at CrossFit from 2008 to 2018, 10 years, not enough time for any magical evolution in the musculoskeletal system. We see the winners, for instance, like 2008, the winner of the snatch event in the women's division in 2018 would have placed second in the men's division in 2008 with the weight she snatched. Did we magically evolve in 10 years? No. We figured out how to more efficiently train and more efficiently recover to be able to do more. And it's a microcosm of what's possible. And so I extrapolate that out to cheer because of the similarities. The lifting of people is similar to the lifting of the barbells. Tumbling is similar to the gymnastics components of CrossFit workouts. The high-intensity sprint-type events that competition cheer is very similar to some of the stimulus that we get in a CrossFit workout. And so when we look at the CrossFit population compared to the cheer population and we say, okay, these CrossFit athletes have not evolved physically, it's clearly an evolution of process, then we can say, what have they changed? Training isn't much different. It can't be. And there's only so many things you can do. But if you look back over the last 10 years in CrossFit, everything has been about recovery, better sleep, better nutrition, better mobility, prep work, recovery work, everything under the sun to get better quicker to be able to perform. And I feel that cheer falls in the same thing. It's the kids are not overtraining. They're just not recovering, and they're so imbalanced that it creates a problem from there. And I know that because I have taken some athletes that have not changed their training schedule at all, and we've just filled in the gaps with a proper strength and conditioning program to undo the biases that they had in their biomechanics. And it's total volume-wise, they're actually doing more because they have to balance out.
I think it's two sides of the same coin. You can reduce the volume of training to get a person back to optimal level, which it's possible. You can work on their deficits so that they can buffer it better, but there's no one size fits all solution to that. So I think the goal, like the way you state it, and maybe how I would go about it or somebody else is the same. Want them to perform at their optimal level. And whether it's like San Antonio Spurs load management, watch the number of minutes, whether it's being able to buffer that patient better by a strength training and conditioning program, you can do that. It's an emphasis on form, or in some cases a hybrid of all three. We're not just going to reduce the load and volume. We're going to strength train you, and we're also going to work on form and proper stabilization. So I think it brings some interesting points because you can look at it from the standpoint of, hey, it's overtraining, reduce the training stimulus, but that's not always realistic, nor is it always possible. That's just one side of getting to the same thing where there's balance. And you know, if you can stabilize properly, right. You know, like a gymnastics person, like one of the things I had a good discussion on
to your point,
was a conversation of the abdominal brace recently with intra-abdominal pressure. Those are two different stabilization strategies of the spine. And a brace is a very rigid, high threshold technique. Well, if the person is using a high threshold technique and tumbling over and over and over and over again, that's spondylolisthesis in the making, right? But if they're able to control that, stabilize that better with a less rigid technique, it drives down the threshold. You're less likely to overload those posterior joints. They can then tolerate more cycles of flipping extension over and over and over and over again. So to your point, yeah, what I mentioned is half the equation. You've got the other pieces lined up and the works too.
Yeah, and I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, it's always, I look at it as it's kind of like a continuum that you're sliding on. It's like, do we slide more towards doing more to balance, or do we slide less, or more towards doing less to recover, quote unquote. The reason why I tend to err more initially towards this side of it is because, number one, if we've got this history of fear avoidance, fear of bringing up an injury, then the last thing we want to do is say, okay, we got to cut your volume down because it's gonna reignite that catastrophization of activity fuse that we don't want to ignite. The other thing is competitive cheer is very expensive, and most athletes don't go to the doctor because they don't think the doctor understands the totality of the sport. And so when someone comes in and they're like, I rolled my ankle, and you do your exam and you're like, I have, a grade 1 ankle sprain. Most docs who know nothing about cheer, other than like, what do you do at cheer? Oh, we tumble and we jump and we dance and we have, we're lifting people. They're looking at this kid like, you're going to do all that on an ankle sprain and a spring floor? Yeah, no. And they're going to work on a CYA basis and say, you're out for 6 weeks, and then whenever your pain's down, we'll get you back in. I know enough about the sport to say if you've got a grade 1 ankle sprain, like tumbling may not be in the cards, but like you can still tumble or still stunt. You can still work on your choreography. You can still potentially even jump if we're stabilized and we're working on certain things. We don't have to necessarily pull these kids from everything. And so when they get to my office and we do our evaluation, I know enough about the sport, and I try to impart that on docs that want to work with cheers just to learn enough about the sport to know what the pieces of it are. Because if you go to a kid with an ankle sprain and say, you're going to be out for like the next 2 to 3 weeks, they may have 2 competitions and 12 practices. And they weren't even going to come to see you anyway, and we're going to keep going. So let's meet them in the middle and say, hey, look, listen, I know that right now, tumbling's probably not in the cards, but did it hurt whenever you stunt? No. Okay, cool. Keep stunting. Did it hurt when you jump? No. Okay, keep jumping. What about dance? Well, this one part. Okay, cool. Can you mark that part of the dance and still do the rest of it? Well, yeah. Okay, cool. So now we start to have a more agreeable conversation where you're still going to be an effective provider, but you're also going to keep that kid from making it worse.
I think context matters.
Saying, well,
and you're right.
I'm going to do it anyway.
There's the
and they will.
Dirty side of competitive year-round travel baseball, travel soccer, travel cheer. And the year-round dirty secret is that this is an investment, and it changes the nature of the relationship with, unfortunately, of how sometimes we treat, manage, how we talk to parents, how we talk to coaches. But if we can keep them in the sport and keep the context alive and keep them ingrained in there, like you said, it reduces that fear avoidance. It grooves the rhythm that, hey, you're going to overcome this. And then it also, you're respecting the investment part of it, the parent made financially, and the kids making a time investment into the sport too.
Right. And that's a really important part too for docs that want to connect with this population, because it is a great population to work with regardless of what area you're in, is you want to make those connections with the coaches and make sure that the coaches understand that you understand the demands of the sport. You know, our competitions are 2.5 minutes long. I mean, that's it. It's 2.5 minutes. It's not 4 hours on a pitch. It's not, 3 hours on a basketball court. It's 2.5 minutes. So when we think about that, we have to say, if we're going to be a competent provider for cheer athletes, we have to understand the demands are different. So our management strategies have to be different too. We can't be so rigid to, what the textbooks say, because if you came to me with a grade, I've had kids with grade 2 ankle sprains that competed and did fine, right? And I'm not saying every kid with a grade 2 needs to be out and tumbling and running and jumping, but by taking the time to fully assess this athlete and to talk with them about the risk-benefit ratio, to test dynamic explosive movements versus stability movements, and understand what his role in the routine was, we determined, hey, this could be competed on. You are likely going to feel something, but as long as we mitigate certain, potential tragic moments, we should be okay. And he did fine. So I think it's really important that for docs that want to work with the athletes is to connect with the coaches, because the coaches just want communication. They just want to know what's going on, what's our game plan look like, and is this athlete, what's a general timeline for what they're going to be out for, and what can they do now? Because they're trying to manage 20-something other kids that are reliant on that person in that spot on the floor. And so if we can say, hey, they can do this, not this, and this, they can still be on the floor, that coach is going to love you, because they don't have to rewrite an entire stunt sequence and redo an entire formation and change their tumbling sequences. They don't have to do any of that, because they know, like, hey, this kid's going to be out 3 weeks only not tumbling, and then they should be back. Versus, I have no idea.
So you're
what's
sitting
wrong
at
with this kid.
cheerleading practice, or you're sitting at a seminar here, and you're thinking to yourself, you're watching practice, and you're picking out some athletes, and you're watching them move, and you got a little information about each different athlete that you're with. What risk factors consistently do you see that you can say at that practice, maybe not today, but the next couple of weeks, that person's at risk, that person's at risk, I don't like the way that they jump and land? Commonly, what risk factors do you see that lead to some of these injuries, both traumatic and then the progressive microtraumas?
Sure. Ones that are a little bit more hyperlordotic than the others tend to stand out as far as like the lower back type stuff. Ones that have, for lack of a better term, kind of like that pendulous looking abdomen, not necessarily big, but just kind of sway back looking. When they squat, I'm glad you asked this question, because I tried to show this to our coaches last season, and we caught a lot of stuff. If the kids are doing any sort of warm up or conditioning that involves squatting, you will find the worst and the best squats you've ever seen in your life in a cheer gym. And the ones that I get the most fear with are the ones that are doing this starfish, super wide, knees caving in, kind of skiing, skier position, almost like a hinged good morning type squat. Those athletes, I, without a doubt, am expecting they're going to get hurt because they have zero quad or hamstring or glute comfort. They're getting all into their low back, even with just a warm-up squat. So I know that kid's going to have trouble.
Is that squat low back? And you worried about the non-contact ACL with
tumblers,
that too?
You have like some of your specialists.
That pattern is
you can watch.
Translate to back injury, because you're actively involved in the community. Do you see it more as a non-contact ACL in the making, or hey, that's a spondy in the making?
Oh, yeah.
What do you see with that, projecting it forward potentially? Both.
Both.
Base is the person
I
that
see both. If
somebody
they're a base,
up, right?
if
there's some people
that
that don't know the lingo, and I don't know the lingo as well as you. So the base is the person holding somebody up. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I foresee. Yes. So you have your back spot, which is generally your taller base, that's in the back portion of the stunt. Then you have two bases next to the back spot forming like a tripod. So back spot, bases. Then you have your flyer in the middle. And your flyer is going to be equally distributed weight over these three people. Or two, depending on the style of the sequence or whatever. But if they're a base, I'm typically going to see expecting back injuries. If they're a tumbler, like a specialist, where they're doing some fulls and double fulls.
You're looking at squatting patterns. What other risk factors
I'm going to expect that kid to have
do you see? So we can say to a coach, if we're programming it, hey, we want to do something about that kid and that kid. What other risk factors do you see?
I watch when they
inversion
walk,
ankle sprains.
If they're having natural supination just with walking because of the instability of the floor and the shoes not being so great. Some kids have no problem. They're walking. Yep. So I'm looking for ankle sprains there. And then we even did at one point, I can't remember if it was last season or season before, I actually walked every kid during the warm-up through a squat and lunge assessment all at once, like the whole gym. I was like, okay, everybody squat. And I was telling the coaches what to look for. And we looked for that particular thing on the squats. But then I had them do lunges too. And I was telling the coaches, look for knee tracking.
Skinny inline, so you narrow the base down.
Can they get into a half lunge issue and hold, or are they wobbling all over the place? So,
gotcha.
Yeah, so they were on the strips that hold the mats together. So we were able to see, really quickly, do we have a lot of, valgus or varus knees? Do we have any sort of glute weakness and just any stability issues? Or we have any stiffness through the big toes and the ankle that they're kind of kicking and tripod or kickstanding that back foot a little bit to try to get a little bit more surface area on the foot versus having, hallux extension. So it allowed us to really look at just really quickly, like who's all over the place and who can hold it. And so when we identified some of the kids that were struggling, we made sure we corrected that movement and said, okay, from now forward, when we're doing any sort of conditioning or warm up, you need to make sure that you're cleaning this squat up and doing it this way. You need to make sure you're cleaning your lunges up and doing it this way. And what it also did was more or less train the coaches to have something to look for. Because they're, for the most part, they're ignorant to biomechanics, which is fine. But the second we do that assessment, now every one of them is a mini expert in squat and lunge analysis.
Or at least bring it to you, or a strength training and conditioning professional or medical professional, bring it to you. Is this potentially a risk? And early intervention, that's like the women that are on the ACL prevention programs, like a 40 to 60% decline by just being proactive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, there's no way to prevent all of them. There's, as that's kind of a duh. But I think it says a lot to the parents and the coaches and to the athletes when it is something that's being attempted to be proactive about is, again, it goes back to eliminating that culture of fear of like, if something goes wrong, I don't want to tell anybody. Is, we're actively and openly demystifying injury by saying we recognize
what
it's
are
possible,
your top 2 or 3 tips in the injury
to eliminate
reduction
it, and if we can't,
space?
we're also here to
what
fix
do you
it
find
once,
consistently
if
you keep
and when
going
it does
back
happen.
to say, hey, Houston, there's a problem, but you know what? The good thing is if we do these 2 or 3 things consistently, you give these recommendations to your athletes. What are the top prevention tips that you're finding you're giving?
So for the ankle, which tends to be the most treated injury, adding things in like aggressive, mindful heel walking is really the easiest way to decrease ankle sprain frequency. Like we talked about, they spend so much time in plantar flexion that if we can, at the beginning of a practice, have them take, 2 minutes of dedicated, like aggressive heel walking where we're trying to get no part of the forefoot on the floor, really feeling a burn in the tib anterior. And as they get better, even trying to add maybe a little bit of an eversion to it, feel a little bit of that peroneal kick in as we're walking, and add that in every single day, or at least every day you're in the gym. That's a very easy thing to throw into a thing that you're already doing. They're already going through their warm-up.
So kind of like a reset, like hitting Control-Alt-Delete. Like if we just program it, Control-Alt-Delete, Control-Alt-Delete, you're going to go through a 60-minute training session of plantar flexion, inversion, plantar flexion,
and then as far as
we do 2 minutes in the front, 2 minutes in the back end. It's like telling your body, reboot the computer. You can still access this and also limit the prolonged cycles of plantar flexion eversion. Is that how you're utilizing it? Okay.
Yes. And along with the inversion sprains, the other bad injury that happens to the ankle in tumbling is anterior impingement, because they get so lax in that anterior capsule that when they do need some dorsiflexion, let's say they land short in a tumbling skill, they land all on the forefoot, and they need some requisite dorsiflexion to kind of absorb back towards the calcaneus and the Achilles, they don't have it. They've just got so much laxity that they just pinch all of those anterior structures and jam the front of the talus. If we can just get some dorsiflexion to where they have access to a little bit when they land short, that alone makes a huge difference. And I've seen that with kids who are chronically impinged in the anterior capsule, that once we got them to a point where like they could work some dorsiflexion, I've seen them land short in skills and went like, crap, and like run over like, hey, everything okay? And they're like, no, I feel okay. Like it's quick. It will quickly change the dynamics of the ankle. So working the dorsiflexion, super easy to drop the ankle injuries down. And then as far as the low back goes, I really feel that the most effective strategy for low back is to cut it off at the beginning, like cut it off at the pass. And I mean by, instead of implementing like specific things like core conditioning specifically or any sort of exercise activity there, is to educate the coaches on how to get them to simply perform their skills better. It's so much harder to undo a lower cross, quote unquote, lower cross syndrome in a cheer athlete when everything they do has it ingrained in it. It's so harder to undo that with a therapeutic intervention than it is to say, we are going to pound technique in stunting and tumbling so hard that we don't have this issue. It's too many skills require the low back in the sport, and too often athletes are hyperlordotic in everything. So to try to undo it with a therapeutic means and then hope that it translates, it's so hard for that to happen. And what ends up happening is I get them good in the clinic, and I
translating
still
a
end up
motor
having to work
skill
with
from
them.
your clinic table
Because
to
there's
a
things I can't
dynamic
reproduce in
setting
clinic.
where they have
I can't reproduce a
to
stunt
do it.
in clinic.
It's hard to do that.
So I end up
That's
having
a
to do
coaching
it
solution
anyway.
rather than a physical solution, I think is what you're getting at. Yeah. It happens with the golf swing too.
Exactly. And a lot of times they can't reproduce it. Exactly.
Yeah.
We get to a point a lot of times where the conversation is, hey, I can't reproduce your pain here. That doesn't mean you don't have it.
Yeah.
It just means I can't reproduce it. So how can I fix this any further other than getting you in that modality and let's watch it happen in real time under safe conditions, but like, let's see how you're doing it. So I'll either have them bring footage of them doing that skill, tumbling, stunting, etc. Or if I'm at the gym, like, let's grab your stunt group. Let's watch you guys do this. Okay, now I can pinpoint that is so much easier to do than to try to take a pull-off lunge,
you need to be
anti-rotation,
on
and a therapeutic
and
plank.
It translates better because it's
and
right
try to translate
then
that
and there
into
the correction is made. Not something I don't know how this one translates. You're sitting on your table static. So, yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up. Doc, one of the points you mentioned, and this is, I think, a big thing with the cheer athletes, this is what I'm finding, at least from, is how to talk to the parents successfully, because expectation, they're investing heavily, time, money, energy, resources. The coaches are now becoming more professional. That's their endeavor. That's what they do. They're no longer part-time coaches. They run cheer camps, cheer academies. So how can we get information from you, like how best to communicate to the parent, how best to communicate to the athlete, how best to communicate what's worked for you? Like how do you, break this down? Like, what do they want to hear? What do they need? How do you communicate the medical message without stepping on toes? What seems to be things that have worked for you over the years?
Sure. So my situation is a little different just because I've been in this sport for 20 years, right? So I've coached, I've been an athlete, I've been a director, and now working in sports healthcare. That carries a little bit of weight, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to have that acumen to be able to do that. What you need to present, though, is that you have the same ability to address their issues that I do. And the best way to do that, if you're talking to a parent, is to tell them, my number one goal is to keep your kid healthy and able to compete. I want to get them back on the competition floor as fast as possible. I want to reduce their time off and their skills that they can't do right now. I want to reduce that as much as I can so that they are still part of the team and part of their program. And the first thing to open with is my number one goal is to try to keep your kid in this sport as much as possible. That brings down all of the fear of I'm going to lose this investment. My kid's going to be heartbroken. You start with my number one goal is to keep them in this thing as much as I can and get them back to 100% as fast as possible. To the coaches, pretty much the same message. Hey, I understand what this sport has in it. I understand the pieces of it. Or if you're somebody that doesn't, I would like to learn about what all happens in a cheer routine or a practice. Can I come and watch? Can you teach me what a basket toss looks like? Can you teach me what a tumbling pass looks like? Can I come and hang out for a couple of hours so that I'm well-versed in what you guys do so I know how to manage the injuries? So whatever side of that coin you're on, I've got some knowledge already or I have zero knowledge. Just talking to the coaches and saying, hey, I understand what the kids do. So in the event that someone's hurt, I can help to manage this to keep them as much involved as possible so it takes stress off of you having to redo an entire routine. Or I don't know a lot, but I'm invested in learning. Can you teach me? Can I come and watch so that I can then be a knowledgeable resource for you? And then to the kids, number one thing is eliminate the fear culture. Let them know, hey, I'm not the type of doc who's going to tell you, oh, you have some pain, you're out for 6 weeks. Like, I'm not that guy. And I tell every single kid that when they come in. I tell them, I am not the guy that has just a blanket pull you from everything. If something is serious enough, we will have that discussion. But until that point, my goal is to not have to pull you from everything. I want to keep you as involved as possible so that you are still a valuable member to your team and so that you still feel like you're making progress as an athlete. And it brings down the catastrophe. It brings down the fear. It validates them for stepping up and saying, I hurt. It rewards them for doing that, which creates a good cycle. So I think just that open communication of, I want to be different than the doctors that you have maybe typically worked with. I want to provide a different service and different type of environment and resource for you guys. And I'm open to learning how to do that and how to best serve you guys. And I think coming at it from that point has made it very easy.
It's game over there for a little bit.
Be like, yeah, well, my back does hurt. Cool. Let's get it taken care of now.
Yeah, it sounds like your approach, and I like it. One of understanding, like let's all understand each other. Let's get the elephant in the room addressed. I want your kid to compete and train and be healthy.
Happens far too often.
Two is, addressing the fear topic. Let's keep you out there. We may need to tinker some things, but you did right by bringing this up. You did right by coming in and getting this addressed. I like that. Understanding and addressing the fear directly, right off the bat. Doc, so you got a lot of knowledge and information. I want 2 to 3 tips. What are your top 2 to 3 tips to build strength first, second, power in your cheer athletes? You're now putting on the strength training and conditioning cap, injury prevention, performance enhancement. What are your top 2 to 3 tips? You mentioned the HIT style CrossFit programming. I'm curious, would that be, or something else, your top 2 to 3 tips for strength and power?
Sure. So the volume for their training is typically pretty high, as far as like sessions of practice and tumbling and the different elements that they do. So I try to keep the training as concise as I can and not just ad nauseum because, I think it looks sexy or whatever. So I tend to try to look for compound explosive movements. I try to get them on a barbell. Olympic lifting movements and variations of that are my go-to. Snatch, clean and jerk. Overhead press, squat variations. I want to be respectful of their training volume and their training time as far as how much time they're spending in the gym. So in order to do that, I try to condense things into bigger movements. So barbell stuff, again, compound whole body movements, training more movement specific than body part specific. The Olympic lifts translate the closest to everything we do. So I tend to make those the big foundation of how I strength train and create power. And then their competitions are only 2.5 minutes. So the longest that they will do things in a nonstop time frame is 2.5 minutes, right? So when I do any sort of conditioning, I tend to do more short, like that kind of like 30-second to 3-minute window, and I may do repeats of that. I may do a competition, like a mock competition day where we'll have, a 4-minute block here with a 2-minute rest while they're transitioning from floor to floor, getting ready to go compete. And then we have a 2.5-minute routine that would mimic actually competing. So we do a lot of gymnastics type stuff, some lifting things to mimic, stunting.
Not at all.
A lot of it is geared towards reproducing the elements of the routine, but not being long duration steady state, because there is nothing in the sport that is long duration steady state. There is no aerobic anything. Everything is anaerobic.
That's like,
so if you're doing any sort of conditioning,
that's like making the baseball player run for 30 minutes and doing a 2-mile or 3-mile run
20 minutes
for what? They run 60 to 90 feet.
Capacity.
Maybe if you're in the outfield a little bit more, and if you're touching all the bases, you're probably not hitting a home. You're probably not hitting an in the park homer. Probably hit it out of the park, and all you need to do is trot around the 4 bases, right? Like, makes zero sense with sprinting in baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anaerobic.
And their practices are the practices are anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours anyway, or 3.
Yep.
So they're getting steady state cardio the whole time.
I have a question because I've had trouble in this demographic. Part of my training is actually my first love, my first passion is strength training.
There's no need to train that anymore.
I always struggled with demographic.
So short, explosive, condensed workouts.
13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I'm sure you're seeing some of those, and getting them into strength training conditioning programs. Not familiar with them, poor movement patterning, don't want to load a bar, can't progress it. And the Olympic movements in particular require a high level of control, high level of skill. Have you been able to navigate that? Because that's a population where I usually, if I'm going to do it, I'm staying away from the barbell. I'm not doing a power clean. I'm doing a hang clean, or I'm just doing more of an explosive movement with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. Like, I've searched for other solutions. I haven't done a ton of barbell and Olympic stuff in that demographic. Have you been able to navigate that if that's part of your training routine?
So the number one is it's required. So there's no way for them to get around it. So that eliminates the, can I get them in there? Yeah, they're on the team. They're doing it. That's part of our gym's culture is strength conditioning. You would be surprised, and I think our listeners would be surprised. There is so much similarity to Olympic lifting and stunting that they already do that I have, and this is no exaggeration, 90+% of the kids that I have ever handed a barbell to in a group setting or one-on-one and demonstrated maybe once, 90+% of them have capacity to do it with good form. It's the sport builds it, and it builds on it. I mean, it's there. It's I promise you, it's there. It surprised me the first time it happened. I was like, wow, these kids took to that like really well with weight, like under good amounts of load. And every single time I have led a group or even one-on-one, there's some sense of familiarity that is there. It's intriguing. It's very intriguing to see because I'm sitting here walking into these things thinking, things about to go to hell in a handbasket.
If you're starting down here and then you're trying to get somebody up, and that's essentially
how much
clean, right?
They have the capacity.
Yeah, and then you add to it the press overhead, right? That's
mind-boggling, to be honest. It really is. And I joke with these.
It's kind of fuzzy, but yes, I see that.
Yeah. I mean,
are you in that picture?
That's what we do.
Man, I was looking for the person with the Florida mullet. I guess I must have missed that.
Yeah, that's what we do. So if they've already got that background of holding, yeah, that's me right there. Yeah, they made me cut that. But if I would say if you have access to some of the trainer bars, some of the 15-pound bars.
Doc, we're going to ask one more question, then we're going to close it down. And I appreciate your time and your willingness to give and sharing your passion for the sport and the community here.
See what
if you get a structure, a training block.
You will be shocked.
I'm a big fan of 4 seasons, and I'm not talking about fall, spring, winter, and summer. I'm talking about preseason, in-season, off-season, and postseason.
Sure.
And structuring your training blocks according to what the goal is. Circle that big day on the calendar. It's a little different, but how would you structure a training block for your cheer athletes? I know that's a big question. There's a lot of variables, competition dates, but what would a sample training block look like for you? Because that's the thing I'm not being in the community, having a little bit of ancillary knowledge, working a little bit in college. I have an idea of the games and the practice and tournaments, but what would that block look like for a competitive cheer athlete at this point in time?
Right. Sure. So our season, quote unquote, starts in the competitive season starts early fall and ends late spring. So usually the first competitions are going to be September, October. You're going to have your pre-New Year competitions. Then you have your biggest
August to April.
In-season events are happening circa December, January. and then into February, and then you've got kind of the back half of the season where you get close to your nationals and your world's level events. So that's kind of your competitive season. Now, what's pretty much, I'd say August and May, April, May, Then you may have like 3 weeks off, maybe if you're lucky, and you get into summer camps, training, skills camps, and your tryouts for most programs are going to be in the end of the previous season. So when we say like there's no off season, most gyms are already getting ready for tryouts before they've even finished that season. And so we do tryouts, and then we have maybe a short little break in the early summer, but then it's camp, it's skills clinics. Then you've got choreography. Like our gym, we just did our skills camp this weekend. Our first teams that are doing their choreography, getting their routine built, start next week. And they will work choreography all summer and getting ready for that first competition in like September, October. So all that being said, the summertime is where the densest portion of training begins, because once we get into competition season, it's like practices during the week, playing cleanup, and competing on the weekend. We competed the weekend before. We got feedback from judges. We need to clean this up. We need to clean that up. Cindy got hurt. Billy sprained his ankle. We got to sub people in, shift things around. So during the season, it's a lot more maintenance. So I'd say if you're going to have any part of your year where you can make some big gains on strength and conditioning, your summer is going to be the part, like the biggest part of it. And then once you get into early fall and you start competing, I would say your biggest thing there is trying to maintain balance with where you feel your athletes are being overworked, right? If you start to see some of that patterning, that movement patterning,
Gotcha.
To then say, okay, our conditioning goal is going to be, we need to really work glute strength. We need to really work hamstring strength. We need to really work core stability, shoulder health from all the tumbling and stuff.
Doc, thank you for your time. Let's recap this. Give me 3 points. We need a lot of information. Give me 3 things that an average provider like myself, a roster provider, or a sports chiropractor, or a sports physical therapist, and athletic trainer. Let's recap this with 3 critical points that you'd like to just get out to the medical community in general.
If you want to work with this population, get in and meet coaches and learn about what the sport is. Learn about what is in, like what pieces make up competitive cheer. Have a different mindset with how you're going to manage these athletes versus like your footballers, your basketball players, your baseball players, because the demands are different. And out of respect for these kids and for the sport, we want to provide them with a different management strategy for the injuries that they have. And then the last point I would say, really super specific, but very important. If you get into a program or get working with a program, make sure to go to the parent meetings. After tryouts, when teams are selected, every gym is going to have a meeting with all of the parents from all of their new athletes to go over policies of the gym, to go over practices, what their payments are going to be, what competition season is going to look like, it's a very, very big day or big weekend. Our gym has like 15 teams. It took an entire weekend to meet all the teams. Be at that event to meet every parent. And just ask the owners or the coaches, whoever does it, say, hey, can you mind if I introduce myself just so people see me around the gym? They're not like, who's this guy or gal that's just like kind of always there? Do you mind if I introduce myself?
Integrating part of the community.
All the stuff we talked about your goals to keep them out there. You understand the sport. You're there to help and be a resource. You're talking for a big gym, hundreds of families that just met you and know that you're there to keep their investment safe. It is a massive
Doc, where can people find you?
Exactly.
How can people reach out to you?
It will boom your practice. To get in front of 500 families and say, I'm here to keep your kid and your investment, quote unquote, safe. Trust me, get ready for your phone to start ringing. Yeah, so my website is www.cheerleadingblueprints.com. Our goal is to build better cheer athletes. Cheerleading Blueprints across all social media platforms, youtube.com/cheerleading blueprints, also on Instagram. And then for all treatment, I do treat with Orasti, so I do not treat outside of Orasti. So every athlete that I work with comes to my Orasti clinic in Shirts, Texas, and we're able to provide soft tissue and
cheerleadingblueprints.com. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's the online resource for the cheer community for tumbling, acrobatics, gymnastics, cheer athletes. It has links for performance enhancement, injury prevention, online coaching. So if you need to see that sexy, hot face more and more and more, that's what you're going to get. Well, it beats this Greek mugshot right about here, right about now. So I have the face only a mother can love, and unfortunately a voice that's not for radio, but that does not preclude me from podcasting.
That's going to scare away business, Dino. What are you doing?
Doc, thanks for the time. Appreciate the knowledge bombs that you dropped on us. Look forward to catching up soon when we get the chance. All right, you too, bud. Thank you.
Beautiful. And you're doing a great job, man. I really appreciate it.